Well, wonderful. It is a great privilege to see all of you here, and we look forward to a truly interactive conversation with you. We are going to have a brief welcome. We're then going to provide a snapshot of LSI. We're going to go deeper into the learning journey, talk about the selection process, and then we try to spend about half of the time of these information sessions in Q&A because we find that there are a lot of individualized questions that apply nonetheless to many others. And so we're really looking forward to the chance to hear your thoughts and questions. I will share as I begin the welcome that my colleague Diana Petty, who leads this initiative on behalf of our school and university, is not able to make it due to a last minute conflict, but sends her excitement to meet with anyone individually who has follow-up questions. And I will be filling in for her, which, as Laura knows, having gone through the program, is no small feat because she is a visionary leader, and we are incredibly fortunate to have her moving this initiative forward in so many ways. But I'll start maybe with my own introduction. I'm Seth Green. I'm the Dean of the Graham School here at the University of Chicago. I am also the decanal sponsor of this initiative because it is a university-wide initiative, but the operations of it are housed in our school, which is the home of lifelong learning and leadership at the University of Chicago. And my background prior to being at the university was leading a center focused on social innovation, and then time leading a nonprofit and time at McKinsey and Company. And so it has been an utter joy to be part of the founding team of this initiative. And even though this is one of a number of things that I'm involved in, I'll quietly say this is truly the jewel of my experience here because it is just such a special initiative that has really made such a big difference for our university in bringing incredible human beings to campus who have enriched our campus as well as helped them to better impact society. And with that, let me turn it over to the other person who is in the room with us, who's on this slide, Laura Dunn. Laura is now an advanced fellow, which means that she's actually in her second year, what we consider to be the Activate year, where a subset of people who have designed a roadmap and then still want to be at the university as a platform as they then launch that next chapter might participate. But she's going to be talking today about her first year in the program as a fellow and the experience she had being in our inaugural cohort. And so let me turn over to you, Laura. Apologies that this slide is absolutely wrong in the name it has up there, but it has your face on it. So my apologies. We went into a last minute effort here to try to update things with Diana's unexpected absence. And so Laura, do you want to share who you are and your background, what brought you to LSI?
Sure. And I'll have to let Jeff know so that he's now being identified as me. So I had a career primarily in corporate finance, although I've done some branding and marketing work at public companies, CFO stuff, M&A, corporate finance, financing, in a number of different industries. And I came to a point probably about 2.5 or 3 years ago that I felt I'd been very active in the philanthropic and civic community here in Chicago. And I felt that I wanted to use my leadership capabilities in a different frame of reference that I would find more purpose. So I kind of decided I was going to leave my job anyway to pursue this and kind of activate my network and try to figure it out on my own. And then magically I was invited to a symposium on this brand new program at University of Chicago. And I got appropriately seduced and decided, well, I'll apply to this and maybe this will give me a structured approach to something I was thinking about doing anyway. So I applied, I got in, and I thought, well, this is a huge commitment, a year. But I thought the timing and everything worked for me. So I decided to proceed with it, which was really a wonderful opportunity for me, frankly. I kind of consider LSI as a giant palate cleanser in your life, shifting from one gear to another. I entered into the program, the problem that was niggling at me, and this is, 2 years ago, was the polarization in our political system here in the US. And I wanted to do something about it, but my big question was, I've never worked on the Hill. I don't have a degree from the Kennedy School. Can a business person really make a difference here at all? And that's what I wanted to explore. So I did explore that, and I have come out the other end with some very specific ideas of how I can move the needle here. But I have to say, my 19 other fellows who became my new 19 best friends all thought I was crazy and kind of trying to attack this huge problem.
Well, we'll talk more about how you've gone about that because it is, I think, a real endorsement of taking a step back, thinking big, and then thinking about where you fit. And we'll also talk a little bit about LSI's role. But thank you, Laura, for introducing yourself properly, despite our poor use of this screen to do so. So I'm going to jump into a snapshot of LSI, and then I'm going to come back consistently to Laura to kind of have you hear about her experience because, we can talk about what we're intending, but we thought it was much more helpful for you to hear from someone who's gone through the program and can give your firsthand experience on what it looks like. And so let me just start with big picture. This is an initiative to support distinguished leaders in meaningful next chapters for themselves and for society. And typically, the reason someone would find value in LSI's tools, and we'll talk more about what this looks like, is that they would like that meaningful next chapter to have some new direction that is different from what they've done to date. And so we genuinely say that these are people with the greatest talents who want to apply them in a new way. And so they need a partner in discovery to be able to maximize that next chapter, both for themselves, and we do a lot of self-discovery, and for positively impacting the world. And the rationale behind this, because we are young, we are a year and a half into this very exciting initiative at the university, but we see it as the future, is that there are two mega trends that we see as calling us in higher education to be much more thoughtful about the second half of life and our role in it. And the first is that people are living longer. And if you just look at the university, and you can see here 1880, if you go up to 1890, that's when we were founded as a university, the age expected in those days was late 40s. So that was the average in the US. Fast forward to today, we're late 70s, although the impact of wealth and education has become even more significant, such that for the population that we serve in LSI, it is often people who, when they are reaching their 60 or 65th birthday, reliably are looking out now to 85 to 90. And so the way we often describe this is since the university was founded, just for the average person, there is now a second adulthood. Instead of looking at 18 when you get to the university at 30 years, you're now looking at 18 at 60 years. And often, if you look within those indicators, quite a bit longer. And so people are living longer. They're in a very dynamic world. And so point one is that learning for purposeful leadership may need to take place at numerous points of the trajectory because the old model of I learn, I earn, I retire is not necessarily fitting this long life world. The second big factor, and this is all something you know well because I saw the different titles that you're bringing into this room, your leaders, is that people are now in much more complex systems. And that includes in the big issues that we're focused on societally, whether we're talking about climate change or economic inclusion or AI and humanity. These are very complex issues that are typically driven significantly by systems. And while it's wonderful that we have so many small scale, for example, nonprofits or social impact efforts, one of the things that we believe we need to accelerate are significant strategic efforts to try to address some of the most complex challenges through the private and social and public sectors. And so as we thought about where there is an immense need for leadership, we thought this segment of the population that's living longer, which is people that have had accomplishment leading in big systems, this segment could be especially valuable to activate. And so we think of this in many ways as an effort to really activate a talent pool for society that we believe is currently underutilized because there are so many challenges in, for example, being very effective as the leader of a corporation and then finding a way over into some of the same tools like Laura has done to try to drive innovation in society. So when we think about LSI, we think of ourselves fitting into this virtuous cycle where we're helping individuals who want more meaning potentially at this stage of life or different meaning. And then we also feel very strongly this is an opportunity to activate a really important leadership force for society. And so that's the why behind LSI. And let me talk a little bit about the how. And then I'm going to pause. I want to talk to Laura, but I'm going to come back to the what and get into the specifics of the program itself. The how is that we go through with you a year-long process of helping you to really define your roadmap for your next chapter. And we start very inward, which is to say, what's your vision, mission, and values? What is going to make you satisfied at this stage in your life? And a lot of times, the big challenge there is that for people that are moving beyond their careers, they've had a very clear objective for a long time, which might be leading at the highest level in their industry or firm. And now, having achieved that, there may be much greater ambiguity about exactly what that meaning and purpose looks like. And so we really start there to think about your mission, vision, and values. Then we say, okay, now we need to marry that with a meaningful issue in the world. And so that's where you look deeply at issues. Laura mentioned her issue, which is around democracy and polarization. But we thankfully cover every issue that anyone is interested in at the university, and we cover it from all perspectives. We are big believers that we do not teach what to think, we teach how to think, and we are excited to accelerate the ideas of people that may have markedly different views on the world and very different ways of achieving societal change. And then finally, we look at the specific roles, applications, and partnerships that you would intend. And we do a lot of work around network development for you and with you to make sure that you're in a place where you can find that intersection between what motivates you and what might meaningfully impact society, and then grow into roles that allow you to lead on those topics. And I'll just finally say that you do all of this, and this is the most important ingredient in cohort. And so this is our second cohort on the screen, and they are currently just finishing quarter 1 of their fellowship. And Laura was part of the inaugural cohort last year, and so can speak about all 3 quarters. And what it allows, I think, and I'll come to Laura first on this question, is it allows you the opportunity to truly be in this journey with other people who are asking the same questions. And we believe at the university the greatest knowledge happens in co-construction, meaning it doesn't happen where you're in a lecture and someone tells you. It happens because you are part of constructing that answer. And we're fortunate we have gifted faculty, but they really see their role here as to maybe give a mini lecture on some topics, but then really step back. And the opportunity is to facilitate knowledge sharing and rigorous inquiry across the group. And so maybe I'll start there, Laura. If you could talk a little bit about the value of the cohort in this experience, because when we did the survey at the end of year 1, we're very proud that our faculty were very prized, that you all thought the methodology was effective, but we asked you what's the most important ingredient, and it was universal, the cohort. And so can you just talk a little bit about, the cohort you're a part of, its dimensions, and why it mattered to you?
Yeah. So there were 20 of us. It was a diverse group. Half of us were from Chicago. The rest, mostly US. We had a guy from Nigeria as well. And everyone very accomplished. There were business leaders, there were nonprofit leaders, there were former, political office holder, there were docs, there were lawyers, everyone very accomplished in their space. But what I think we all marveled at the end of the end of the program was within a month or a month and a half, you kind of forgot what everyone did because nobody was really, talking about what they were. We were talking more about who we were. And the course, the series of classes we took, which were with absolutely brilliant professors, um, really took us deeply into a lot of questions that kind of forced us to confront ourselves individually and across, the cohort of who we were, what was important in our lives. Many of the classes were um, very deep in the conversations, and it was very much a safe space. We got very vulnerable with each other, talking about stuff. I got to deeply know my schoolmates, but it was wonderful to be taking a class with a world-class philosopher or sociologist or psychologist and really get into some deep academic work, but then really spend the time to talk about it as mature adults. It was truly a valuable experience that I've never been able to touch.
And can you talk a little bit about, and I'll maybe just share the theory on cohort composition. We work really hard, while it's very accomplished individuals, to reflect society. So it's about 65% private sector experience, about 35% public and social sector. It is people across every domain area. So we have, people that have led at the highest levels of accounting, investing, consulting, law firms, been chief executives of, Fortune 1000 companies. So we have that world. Then we have doctors and academics and, large nonprofit leaders. And then we have government leaders and people that have led in public agency, been elected officials. And then, obviously working on racial and ethnic and gender and those pieces as well. And our belief is that if you can accomplish those things, then what happens is that you set people up for transitions, because one of the goals people have is if they want to go in a new direction, it's not just knowing the domain, it's also knowing the people, knowing its culture. And what we've seen a lot of is actually people wanting to go in some ways, other directions that then their cohort facilitates. So, in your case, there were a lot of people in your cohort who have worked on democracy issues. And then there were some nonprofit leaders. I'm thinking of another Laura in the group, Laura Thrall, who had been an incredible nonprofit leader, led at the highest levels of these national and global nonprofits, and said, you know what? I have a lot of board leadership experience. I'd like to serve on a corporate and private sector board. And then here are all these people, led at the highest levels there, and, former CEO of Rosetta Stone and board member of lots of different private companies because of venture investments and things like that. And he's sharing insights. And so there's that kind of interplay, and it brings these themes that we have that we're teaching about, but it brings them into a much more interconnected context where you have a person whose experience you might rely on. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that composition element of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What was probably so interesting to me was just, the generosity and the ability to kind of lean on each other as we go through this process. And as we started kind of narrowing our aperture of what we wanted to do, there was a real interesting similarity of approach or of ways of thinking through it. So, in my case, I got very close to a couple folks who are in entirely different realms, in the nonviolence area, in the, creating social capital for underprivileged kids area. Yet we were all kind of facing the same kind of process, and where do we land, and just the ability to lean on folks as you bring this to fruition and get their thoughts, but also to get their networks and their connections, and the selflessness and really buying into your success. And those relationships continue. I mean, I talk to my cohort, I talk to a couple of them weekly, if not more, as we kind of work through where we're going and what we're doing in this next chapter. It's really a wonderful opportunity.
And then just before I share a few more slides on the what and the methodology, can you just talk about the end product? Because the end of this is a purpose plan. It is not, as you know, a perfect map of everything you're going to do, but it is a roadmap at a high level of where you're headed, what you still need to learn in many cases, or where you still need to grow, and then a compass for how you then navigate decisions on that road to your next chapter. And so just, I mean, if you can provide an overview, maybe even like the pitch version of the plan that you developed and, the outcome that you're working toward right now. And I know you're still in the stage of building the plane as you fly it.
Yeah. So, I mentioned I came into the program saying I want to do something about reforming US democracy to make it less polarized. And I got a few weeks into the program and there was a heavy emphasis on academic research and writing a thesis. And I knew I was, we have an opportunity to take audit classes, which I knew I wanted to focus in the political science, public policy area, which I indeed did and was enormously enlightening. Um, but I also, in addition to the academic research, I really wanted to meet people in this space. So what I worked through over the course of, 7.5 months was starting with this wide aperture and then diagnosing like what are the problems, what's driving polarization. And I developed a list of issues, research them academically, and then, kind of, well, what are the solutions? What are people doing around this? And Seth stepped up and really helped me out enormously because I said, I want to meet who's in this space, who is working on this in these different areas. And he gave me 7 names the next day and he set up introductions. And that really drove me to 7.5 months of extensive networking. I was doing between 2 and 5 meetings a week with different political operatives, nonprofits, former politicians, funders, grassroots people, policy people, and it really helped me build kind of a landscape of who's working in this space and what are they doing. And that I learn more. I'm very extroverted. I learn more through conversations. So that was enormously helpful for me. And it drove me through the course of the year as I was doing kind of not only the underlying coursework of discovering myself and, kind of the through line of my life and where I wanted to take it. I'm taking kind of these political science classes, which are giving me some theoretical construct. And then very practically, I'm meeting people who are in the space. And I kind of, I'm a former corporate strategist too. I kind of said, where are the white spaces that I could add some value? And I saw 2 big white spaces. One was as I was honing in on the solution, which to me was election reform, because I thought in my 10 to 15 year time frame, I felt I could get the most traction there. The white space I saw there was it tended to be very progressive, uh, led by very progressive political points of view. So there wasn't a centrist or a conservative point of view at the table, and that the business community was largely absent in the movement. And I felt there was a huge opportunity. And given my work in doing business risk management and financial and business planning for decades, I saw a lot of opportunity there. So I decided to focus on those areas. But that didn't come to me till like April, May timeframe. And then I started pitching those thoughts to folks and got tremendously positive feedback and decided at that point, okay, this is where I'm going to go and I'm going to develop a plan around it. But it took a while for me to really explore, and I kind of was all over the place for a while, but I very, started narrowing the aperture, and I'm still in the election reform space, where I'm going to take it. I'm still kind of exploring how I do that role. I have a game plan, but it doesn't come to you and you don't necessarily come up with things tied in a bow as of May. It's a process.
What I love, Laura, about what you did, and I think it's core to what we're aiming to do with LSI, is that we are aiming to unlock new talent to try to drive impact. And you described, I think, the gap that you saw so perfectly. And I notice it too, because I talk to a lot of people from all across different perspectives and experiences. And so there was a pretty wide group of people that were concerned about underscore democracy and that were very curious about how to reduce polarization. That was a topic that I think really had interest from people that might be conservative, that might be liberal, that might be in the center. And yet, when you looked at the landscape, you saw, oh, the groups that are working on this, that are given the resources to try to advance it forward, they are associated overwhelmingly with one political viewpoint. So here's a huge part of the country that we haven't figured out how to activate this interest and this demand, right? And I am a business person. I come out of a world of being a corporate treasurer. I see these issues in that landscape. I know networks of people from across different perspectives, different parties, all these things. This could be bipartisan. This could be moving the needle. I can be an agent of change, right? And that's a really big deal, I think. And that is not to specifically talk about your example in its content, but in its theory, which is new talent, new networks combined with some of these resources can really unlock new avenues. And so just want to point out, I think, the broader statement that makes, which is true across all 20 of the examples of you and your peers. All right, let me bring us back to the slides because I want to talk a bit about the learning journey. And you already heard some of this referenced in what Laura described. This is a 3-part learning journey. And the core of it are core classes that you take each quarter, 3 of them, that each have a different thematic goal. And the first part of the journey is what we describe as knowing oneself. And very true to the nerdy nature of the University of Chicago, we believe the best way to know yourself is to read texts across time and space of how people, often in great books, although we have a wide array of different texts that we use, have answered these big questions of why am I here? What's my purpose? What difference am I seeking to make? We are a home that very much believes in great texts, the way that we describe great texts, and we believe they come from all traditions and from many different vantage points. But a great text is a text that is trying to answer a fundamentally big questions about life. And it is successful in answering that question in an uncommonly significant way. That's how we describe these texts. And yes, some of them are Aristotle and Plato, but we also look at texts of the East. And, Laura can share more about her experience. And that is blended, that kind of humanistic inquiry, with a lot of leadership inquiry. And so we have, for example, a class that is co-taught by a Booth professor who does our advanced leadership program at the university, and a classics professor who is looking at that same wisdom but from the perspective of the ancients. And they actually work together in their class so that they can compare notes and think about how you can see both wisdom from your own leadership experience and wisdom from the ages, so to speak. And that's know oneself. And each quarter you're progressing in that. That's also where David Brooks, who is one of the wonderful people that we've brought on as a faculty member to LSI, who comes from outside the university, teaches, and he brings a lot of what he wrote in The Second Mountain and his most recent book, How to Know a Person. There's also a second course, which we call Understand the World. And in this, what we're trying to do is give you new lenses. So we look at a number of big topics, but what we do is not so much about the exact issues. It's to bring different lenses to the same issues to help you think about how you can look at societal issues from different vantage points. And here's the reason why. We find that one of the challenges for people in transitions is that they have grown up in a very specific atmosphere. And they see the world through that lens. Now, we think that is actually a huge superpower. But if you're going to work with people who see the world from other lenses, that superpower can actually become an inhibitor if you can't also see how they may look at the issue. So, for example, you might look at crime in this Understand the World sequence. And here at the university, we have very different takes on that topic. We have an economist who runs our crime lab, who's very involved in LSI, and he looks as an economist does with quantitative studies, and he says, look, prosecution equals more deterrence, and you end up having a benefit on public safety. There's a MacArthur genius here who is a sociologist who is looking at these topics, and he looks at what can be very vicious cycles where you start putting people behind prisons and then their kids don't have access to them, and it is a cycle that families have trouble escaping from. And he is incredible in being able to tell that story and how it happens. Those are 2 different lenses on the same topic, and they may have disagreements about policy, about analysis. We in the University of Chicago do not say that one is right or one is wrong. Our aim is to give you new lenses, and for someone maybe coming from the private sector, they may look as an economist does at this issue. They may not change their mindset about the economist toolkit being the right one. But if they've been in a room with a sociologist and a policy person and an anthropologist, and then suddenly they're in that room now trying to move this issue forward, they understand where people are coming from. And it's not necessarily that that person doesn't understand economics or doesn't get it. It's that they're looking at it with a different lens. And so we find this understand the world to be this real value of helping people that have had great careers and still want to use that career and its talents to build and expand their horizons so that they can see and be able to collaborate with people from many different perspectives. Then the final piece, which is obviously core, if we're going to help on your next chapter, is envisioning that next chapter. And what we do in this curriculum is we actually bring in practitioners who are leaders in the spaces that people most typically set up their next chapter. So we have a course on board leadership. We have a course on strategic philanthropy. We have a course on encores where you're setting up a new organization or social enterprise or purely for-profit enterprise. We have career coaching and other resources to help you think if you want to maybe go out and have a whole nother career, but maybe in a new direction. And so the courses are meant to look at what we saw to be the 8 or so biggest ways that people have next chapters, and you get mini courses, and then you get to follow through in the areas that are most significant. And probably about half of the people that have gone through LSI to date have thought about their next chapter as a portfolio life where they may have multiple of these pieces. And then there is about 25% who, like Laura, are setting up an entire institution or organization or enterprise for profit. And then there's about 25% who are thinking, I'm going to go out and have another career, but it's going to be in a new direction that's going to be developed by this learning experience that I've gone into. So those are the three lenses. And then these are the actual names of the courses in yellow. And I'll just share that alongside those core courses, you get to audit 2 courses each quarter from anywhere in the university. The favored places to date, if we look at where registrations have come in, are Booth, which is our School of Business, Harris, which is our School of Public Policy, and Social Sciences, which includes economics and psychology. But you can audit anywhere where it's going to meet your needs. So Laura talked about hers being interest in politics and political science. Then we have immersion days where you go deep on a single societal topic that the cohort is expressing great interest in. This year, it was on public safety and then on immigration. Last year, we had one on AI and society and democracy and disinformation. And the aim there is that most of what we do in Understand the World is different lenses. And in this immersion day series, we bring together scholars who often have competing views to look deeply with you over 2 days at a single societal topic that has great consequence and great timeliness. We have a travel study component. Last year, Laura was part of the group that went to London and they learned about sustainable urbanism. This year, the group will be going to Paris and we'll be looking at the issue of healthy aging and longevity, a topic that the French have quite a bit of significance on. They live significantly longer than us and they pay a lot less for healthcare. We'll be looking at why, what we can learn from their example, and what we might not see as the right answer there. And then we have a seminar we do at the Aspen Institute, which is around values, purpose, and leadership as we were building LSI. Aspen is a close friend of the university and the Graham School, and we were aiming to add this in. And as we talked with them and learned from them, we said, well, would you be open to running your workshop that's so successful, that's proven for a long time, as part of this initiative? And they've been wonderful partners in bringing that in and really embedding it as a core part of the learning experience. Alongside that coursework and co-curricular learning, we have 3 personalized dimensions of this. Each person is assigned an executive coach who you meet with quarterly. They're really looking at that inner piece. How are you thinking about your goals and purpose? How are you thinking about your leadership? An academic advisor who's helping you to look at that societal issue. So this year, Laura's academic advisor is actually the head of our Institute of Politics, a former senator of the United States who's really passionate about how we can bring parties together to move things forward. And then we have a distinguished mentor. That's someone that's typically about 5 to 10 years into what might be described as their encore chapter. They've lived this and they're going to advise you. And where we can, and this has been very fortunate so far, we try to literally marry you with someone that has had that experience for the last 5 or 10 years in the domain area that you're interested in. So Laura's mentor, if I'm remembering correctly, Laura, was Todd Connor, who had worked on many of these democracy oriented issues. So we try to pair in a way where you can hopefully get their lens on the topic as well as on the general experience of Encore leadership. That all results at the end of the year, and you're working on it throughout, in a purpose plan where you articulate the why, the what, and the how of that next chapter. And I'll just say that what we've seen so far is that next chapters look as different as the cohort that comes in. And they go from what we call inside out. Those are people that are really thinking about kind of what is their new way of interacting with society. And it's more an inner journey. I want to treat people this way. I want to engage in this way. I want to, for example, use writing to change hearts and minds. I want to really think about how I bring my voice into a next chapter where I have this kind of platform, all the way to people that are what we call outside in. They're really letting the issue drive them. And I would describe Laura, if it's possible, Laura, to say more outside in the sense that you really looked at the data. You said, okay, here's where I see the gap in this effort to build more effective democracy. Okay, I'm going to go in this direction as a result. And so we see from inside out people that are really using that inner journey to say, here's who I want to be, to here's what society needs. I'm going to really apply my talents in this direction. With that, let me come back, Laura, to you. I've got a couple more questions, and then I want to quickly go through selection and get to your question and answer. Laura, can you just talk a little bit about the different segments that I just described, and maybe starting with the core courses? What was it like to be back in the classroom at this stage of life? You had escaped being a student for a while. What was it like to come back?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the reasons why I got seduced to do this program is, to me, the idea of auditing any class I want at University of Chicago. I felt like it's like an intellectual candy store, so I couldn't wait to do that. Um, but I found that, it's a shift. Even when I was doing my application, I was kind of like, don't they know all I've done is PowerPoints and business memos for the past 30 years? And you're reading a lot of really interesting texts that probably wouldn't be light reading that you do on your own. I'm an avid reader, but it's not stuff I'd pick up and read normally. But doing it in the guided construct of some really brilliant professors, really being able to interact with your cohort as you're doing it and discuss them deeply was invaluable. The core classes we took were just absolutely fascinating. And I think it was as much fun for the professors who were used to teaching undergrads and doing more lecture. Now they were switching into actually discussing the stuff deeply with mature adults. I think they enjoyed it as much as we did. So it was just a lot of fun and energy as we were doing this. And then the audit classes I took they were fascinating. It was a lot of fun to be in classes with undergrads, being the oldest person in the room, kind of, realizing that the intellect is very, very high at University of Chicago. I probably would not have been accepted as an undergrad, but the value of the life experience you bring. One of the classes I audited was Chinese philosophy, and my ability to get to the heart of stuff versus overanalyzing was a lot of fun the professor and I had. It was a small seminar class, but it's really interesting and fun, and it's really fun to see the energy of the younger students, the undergrads, just to hear what they're interested in, why, to kind of broaden your perspective, to get to know them personally. I found after classes, I'd have undergrads or graduate students wanting to talk to me, pull me aside, like, what brought you here, why you're doing it, and asking for career advice and stuff. And that was really fun. But it's something you have to embrace. It is a different kind of work. You have to learn how to, how much reading am I going to do, and how do I pace myself through it without feeling overwhelmed, is important. But I just found it a really fun experience to be on campus. The other thing I'd touch on is there is a lot of programming on campus. I obviously took advantage of all the political programming. The Institute of Politics is world renowned in what they do, and they have a series of Pritzker Fellows they have in every quarter, and they do probably 2 or 3 programming sessions a week, which are small and intimate, and you're talking to former senators, and that was really invaluable to me too. Very exciting and fun.
And then can you just talk about your advisors, Laura, the executive coach, academic, and your mentor?
Yeah, so my academic advisor, Seth talked about Senator Heitkamp is just could not be more helpful in what I'm trying to do in terms of giving me feedback of the approach I'm taking, but also as importantly, ready and able to drive some introductions for me to get some traction on what I'm doing. So that's been invaluable. My executive coach did a lovely job of keeping me on track as I went through the program and kind of putting up the bumpers and getting me to think it was just nice to touch base with somebody who was kind of a distant, interested third party who would listen to you deeply and say, well, yeah, you're on the right track, or have you thought about this? And then my executive coach, I actually am also pursuing some paid corporate board roles, and Anna's been helpful with that. And I also have kind of another coach that's in my space, and he and I got to know each other so well. I now sit on his nonprofit board and I'm working closely with his team. So yeah, they were fabulous connections.
Well, I'm going to move us ahead just because I want to get to your question. So I'm going to quickly go through the selection process. So if you have come out of this information session and you're interested in potentially being considered, we are aiming for individuals who have at least 2 decades of senior leadership experience, a track record of significant accomplishment. Something that is core to everything we do at the university is a willingness to engage in deep, rigorous, and respectful open exchange. You may know that we are a university that believes in free expression, and we want you to be in an environment where your views are challenged, and we think that discomfort is an enabler to discovery. And so we want to encourage people who may be open to being challenged by their peers, by their faculty, and by visitors around their views on the world. We want individuals who have a proven commitment to society, but we are very broad in what that means. We believe that comes out of every sector in the economy. And we are very eager to hear your version of how you've contributed, and we really take seriously every viewpoint in that regard. And so there's an essay question that allows you to talk about whether it's building your company or having this impact in a nonprofit or another domain, how you think about that commitment. And then we want a compelling vision for how this is a meaningful next chapter. And we are looking for people who are thinking not in terms of retirement, but who are often, it's said, thinking about rewirement and refiring in terms of how they contribute. We have a three-part process, and this is very deliberate. We wanted people to be able to just submit what already exists, their resume or biography, and to be screened to know whether or not they are an eligible candidate before they were asked to submit a lot of information, because we want to be respectful of your time. And so the first step of this process is very simple. You submit what exists in terms of a CV, or if your CV hasn't been updated in a long time and you have a biography on your company page, we accept that as well. The aim of that first step is really, is this someone who on the paper meets those eligibility requirements and we see as a promising candidate? Step two gets very individualized. There are, true to the University of Chicago, 5 essays, one that's deeper, which is a personal statement, and then 4 short that are aiming to get your perspective. So think, of those happy memories of working on your college application. We do references differently. References are people, two of whom that you identify. And then at the point at which we believe that there may be a fit based on the other materials, we then call those references. So it's not onerous on the reference or on you. It is an opportunity, though, for us to ask them questions because we're really focused on cohort composition. And so we use that really to better understand the people in the pipeline. Final process part is if you're selected, you participate in an interview that typically includes a faculty member, an advisor to the initiative, and then myself or Diana Petty, the director. The cost of the fellowship is consistent with a year of graduate study at the University of Chicago. Next year, that will be $80,000, but we are very focused on financial assistance. So we are committed to that cohort representing society, and we give very substantial scholarship especially to individuals who may be coming from the public or social sectors, and even though they've reached great accomplishment, might have a different financial reward for that accomplishment. So we do have a high cost, but we're very emphatic that we encourage people to apply because we really are serious about having the most accomplished and significant group come together to build next chapters. And we're very focused on what it takes to make this accessible to as many people as possible. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Let me stop the share of my screen. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or better yet, you can raise your hand, and I'm happy to call on you. You can use the React tab at the bottom of your screen if you want to raise hands. Great. Dan, I see you, and you're unmuted to ask your question.
Yeah, it's not clear to me whether the program works well with somebody who is still working pretty much full time. I can't get a sense for, obviously I have some flexibility in my schedule, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether I can be successful if I'm still working.
So the answer is that the current fellowship is not an ideal fit for someone who is still at the core of their career. We have had people that have moved into, let's say, an executive chairperson or chairman role. And in those cases, they have been able to successfully complete, but they had more flexibility and they were still able to devote an overwhelming focus on LSI. I should have mentioned earlier that the core classes are delivered Monday afternoon through Wednesday afternoon. So we chunk those core classes. And the intention behind that is people often still have many meaningful commitments, board leadership, again, a chairman role, something like that. But they're not in the climax, so to speak, of their career typically because it would not be possible to accomplish both. I should also name that for those who have very specific interests on their audits, so I want to be in this Chinese philosophy class, that's a part of the schedule we can't control. So for those who are just here, and there were a number of people in Laura's cohort who flew in Monday, afternoon and then left Wednesday night, they had to make sure the audits that they took were also in that time frame, which might have limited the possibilities a bit. Let me just preview, you are not alone in being a current executive who is interested in these tools. And you will see an announcement from us in February where we'll be talking about a version of the LSI tools that we are excited to make sure is more accessible to someone who has full-time work. It will not be this fellowship, but we are very focused on trying to make these tools available to more people, and we're working methodically and carefully to construct that in a way that has the greatest impact. So stay tuned on that front. Dwayne, I see your hand. Let me unmute you though. Sorry about that. And John, I see yours. Dwayne, I think you should be able to unmute on your end.
Yeah,
There
I
we
think
go.
I
Perfect.
might have briefly mentioned it, but I was going to ask, did you have to relocate to Chicago? And
Yes,
if you do, is there housing on, that you can access, whatever?
So we have a lot of resources to support people that are relocating. Most of the cohort comes from around the world, not from the Chicago area, although we do intentionally use Chicago as a case study on a regular basis. So, we look at crime, we look at democracy, small d, and how you approach it on a municipal level. We look at the many issues related to sustainability. So this is a global program. People come from around the world. We have a global curriculum, though we do very intentionally use the fact that we're on the south side of Chicago and the fact that we have immense research partnerships here as a laboratory to learn about issues that we hope can both enrich our community by bringing this talent and interaction with it, but also can have what we're learning here and where we're growing here, hopefully positively influence the world. John, I see your question.
Laura, you were in our position 2 years ago, and now you're in the position you're in. Looking back, what surprised you? What was different than what you expected?
I guess I was surprised at the depth of the relationships I developed. So kind of responding to our earlier question, I actually started the program still consulting for the company I was leaving. And that was a hard balance. Like I decided, I ended that relationship at year end, and I decided to really focus on my plan, but also double down on the relationship. So I live in Chicago. I started entertaining folks in my home on weekends because there are people that were, but there were people that were here from around the world that were living here. And so we started doing a lot more socializing after our, we had a regular, go out for drinks after class on Wednesday at a local tavern in Hyde Park. And that was the part that just was refreshingly fantastic.
Right, I see questions that are in the chat. Unless there are any that are live hands, I'll go to them. I'm still fully engaged in my executive position, but interested. Oh, thank you, Carlos. We will make sure everyone on this list receives that announcement as it's ready. And Alan writes, is this a full-time academic program or something else? Yes, this is in our world full-time. It is not credit-bearing, I should clarify, because we do not have assessment for every course. So your assessment, so to speak, is on your capstone, but that is not what qualifies within the university as credit bearing. So it is full-time in nature, and that each week has about 15 hours of contact, meaning, instruction and different types of co-curricular activities, plus reading that's significant. So, I mean, the ballpark we give is something like 30 hours for the core of the curriculum, Laura, if that sounds consistent with your experience. But then for people that are really working on a major project, that is in addition to the core curriculum. So Laura's accomplishing the core curriculum, but then she's also, in her case, envisioning an entire, new initiative. And so that's a very significant lift. There are other people who really did this and they're thinking about a portfolio life. And for them, I think 30 hours is probably the right way to think about the totality of what they're committing to, because they're not doing a major project that they're trying to start up alongside it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you kind of learn to do too, the audit classes are all audit. So thankfully you don't have to write papers and take exams. But you do kind of learn, how do you balance that out? Like this quarter, I took a couple fabulous political science classes that were so insightful given the times we live in. And I learned about 3 weeks in that although the professors had written some amazing books, that the lectures were so solid that I kind of didn't have to do the reading. I got enough out of the lectures. So you kind of do figure that out and how to manage your time.
Al Mink, we see your question.
You bet. Thanks. I'm pulling over here.
Oh, great.
So my basic question is, it's a very simple one. If you covered it, I just missed it at the time. But what's the age range in your cohorts, and what's the desired time in career, particularly if someone, is retiring from one job and is into career 2 and is looking at, doesn't want to retire, but, is kind of looking at the 3rd phase of life instead of the prototypical 2nd phase.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have people at each of those phases in the 1st and 2nd cohorts. And the age range in both cohorts is actually late 40s to mid 70s. And what I think is interesting is that there is a commonality across them, which is that they are at an inflection point. And so the person in their late 40s, they were part of a founding team building a company. They sold that company in their late 40s. Like, that is a life-changing event in terms of, they had a core focus. They had to really be, razor focused on. They thought these issues were really interesting, but never got a chance to look deeply. They thought, oh my God, this is the sabbatical that I was dreaming of, and I don't know what I want to do next. I haven't had an even chance to think beyond the sale of my company. We have someone who is in their mid 70s, and they actually want a very meaningful next chapter. They are not thinking of retirement. They're obviously thinking of a shorter time horizon than the person in their late 40s for that chapter. And, they're thinking differently. They're not necessarily thinking about starting an entirely new organization, but they are both at an inflection point. And one thing I'll just say is that we find the intergenerationality, and let me go to you on this, Laura, to be really generative, because it is really helpful for people who are, in their late 40s to hear how people in their 60s and 70s are looking at life and how they're thinking about meaning and purpose. And the same is true for that, person in their mid 70s to look back and say, how is this person thinking about it? How are generations changing? How are they looking at things differently? So Laura, I don't know if you want to talk. I believe you're on the younger side, but
Aren't
toward
you
the
kind?
middle, toward the middle. Yeah.
Towards the middle. But yeah, it was very interesting to me because honestly, as Seth mentioned, some of the older folks in my cohort had actually had 2 careers already, like very successful and interesting and different careers. And that was really fun to just discern and see where they were going. The younger folks, I think the commonality is the inflection point. But we all deeply learned from each other as we were going through it. And the age piece didn't really become as much of an issue with respect to really figuring out this plan and what we were going to do. We learned from each other, even though we were in different spaces in life and even different social causes we were going after. It was just very interesting to me, the commonality.
Well, I know we are at time, and it looks like we've answered the live questions in the room. Let me just advertise that my email, I'll put it in the chat here, is sethgreen@uchicago.edu. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. This is truly a very important initiative for me and for the university, and we have been in awe of the people who have found their way to candidacy. We've been really thrilled with how you, as potential candidates, can enrich the University of Chicago. And we've been really touched to see that we've had a lasting and meaningful impact so far on the people that have been part of this fellowship, both in life. I mean, as you described, Laura, I'm blown away by the lifelong friendships. I don't think of 50s and 60s being the time you build lifelong friendships. And to my awe, those have been core to every individual's experience, but also so grateful for what you're doing with the tools that are here at the university. So look forward to being in touch with any of you who want further information. And yes, to the question that just came into the chat, we will make sure this recording is available to all of you. Laura, any last thoughts before we go?
No, I mean, it has to fit in the right time in your life to do it, for sure. I don't know anyone in my cohort had any regrets of what the experience we had. It is life-changing, and it does get you to think differently about where you want to go and what you want to do. And, I was a single mom, in the corporate environment for a long time, and this was all about me. This was the first time I was able to do something just for me. And that was really important to me at this point in my life.
Well, a beautiful example. Thank you, Laura, for being such an incredible fellow and now advanced fellow. Thank you all for joining us. Please let us know if you have any questions. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Have great afternoons.